Constitution. And as we look and debate and we compromise and we look at things, we go back to that Constitution and see how it relates or squares what was written there. That's a commonness to all Americans that I think we can agree on and work forward with. I don't care what party you're from. I care about solutions. I care about fixing problems. I care about making sure my kid's future is bright. And if that takes working with 434 other people, I'm happy to do that.
Ms. Van, are you ready? Go ahead.
It's absolutely crucial for the future of this country that we start working together. I hold an office currently that's nonpartisan, and I've been able to build coalitions with my other nonpartisan members who are all really partisan behind the scenes for the future of our counties and the state. We've solved problems by coming together and putting our political partisanism aside. We've come together by looking at what's important for the citizens that we serve and finding a way to solve these problems. We don't let the rhetoric and the jibber-jabber and the talk get to us. We work hard to make sure that we put the people we represent first. And the voters of the state spoke out about that pretty clearly in the last election cycle when they approved the open primary ballot system. This time, when you vote, no matter what your registration is, you can pick the person that's best to serve you in Congress, not the best party to represent you. And that's a very important distinction in this race. You have to be able to reach across party lines and not have your votes every step of the way reflect your ideology and your partisanship. You have to be able to connect with people and understand what people are going through in their communities and understand what they need from you as a representative. And you have to be able to put that connection to work in solving problems. And not just in passing new laws to regulate more things, but in undoing some of the regulations that we've put into place over the last 3 to 4 years. We have to come together to, like I said in my opening statement, to remove the shackles from businesses so that you can get this country back to work, not government. And I think reaching across party lines is the only way we can do this. Now, as chair, again, of the Regional Council of Rural Counties, I have to work with 31 counties in this state. And I guarantee you, 95% of our issues are partisan issues. But I was chosen as their leader from this state because of my ability to put partisanship aside and solve problems for rural California. And I'm going to apply that to solving problems for the 3rd Congressional District.
I've been informed there's a little problem hearing some of you, so make sure you're speaking close to or into a microphone. Okay? I think did we hear Ms. Van? Okay. So I think it's probably you two in the middle. Just move the mic right in front of you, at least. And the gentleman right there, Mr. Bernardini, he'll tell you if we can't hear you.
It's more for the TV.
Okay. Oh, for the TV. Okay. Okay, Mr. Ray, you're up. Sure. Most Americans believe that Congress is more divided along party lines than it has ever been in modern history. If elected, what would you do to help achieve bipartisanship in Congress?
Well, the answer is yes, they are. I don't know if they're more divided than they've ever been. If you read back to American history, and that's a pretty good balance in Congress. But one of the things that I know that we definitely have to do, with all the issues that we have going on right now, what was a couple months back where the Congress's biggest argument at that point was, is tomato paste a vegetable? There are a lot more important things to be taken care of than that. I find that when I sit down with people, people are amazed to find out there's a lot of rhetoric on the left and the right back in Washington. A lot of noise, a lot of yelling and screaming. Both parties trying to make the other party look bad. What I find when I sit down with people, if I sit down with anybody, I don't care what party they're from, give me 5 or 10 minutes, and I don't find some agreement, and I don't get a vote. And the reason is that all yelling and screaming on both the far left and the far right, the vast majority of Americans are just a little left or right of center. Now, when you set down a problem and lay out the solution so that they can see it and it makes sense, they're amazed to find out how much they actually agree on. The key is, if you can do it here, you can do it there. Now, there's going to be some other issues because you've got you've got politicians that, that owe people, that there's been money taken care of, it's hard to get a straight result from some of those folks. But if you take your solution and it makes sense, and you take it to the people who are there elected can put enough pressure on them to get them to vote. That's one thing. The other thing is there was a very good crop of freshman congressmen that came in last time, and I'm hoping that they're going to get some additions of one, which I'm hoping to be one this time. And by working together, we may be able to create a majority to be able to get some things done this time.
Congressman Garamendi.
Let me start by introducing my wife of a few years, Patty. She was the one that really taught me about bipartisan, both her mother and father were Republicans. And, so we learned right away about the necessity for compromise, at least around the dinner table for Thanksgiving, Easter, and so forth. I've been at this many years. The rewriting of the California corporate and personal income tax code, in which we actually reduced the tax rates back in the mid-80s. The Air Mobility Caucus, dealing with Travis and dealing with the mobility that the Air Force has to have to get its job done. Bipartisan in nature, working on a common goal to make sure that our military has the mobility necessary to deal with whatever comes up, and to make sure that Travis continues to be a key airport and Air Force base here in this nation. Agricultural flood issues. Neighbor came to me in Walnut Grove down in the Delta and said, "Did you know that you're not going to be able to build your barn out back?" I said, "No, what's happened?" "Got a problem. The levees have been downgraded, can't get flood insurance." So up and down this new district, this problem exists. Working with Democrats and Republicans, local as well as the federal level, we introduced a major piece of legislation that will be nationwide in scope, providing an agricultural flood system, one that will deal with the agricultural interests in the flood zones so that they can continue to build this facilities that are necessary and avoid urbanization of those areas. I think we're all concerned about our civil liberties. That's an issue too. Working across the aisle with a very conservative fellow out of Louisiana, we're going to put into the National Defense Authorization Act a piece of legislation called the due process, eliminating the ability of the government, the military, and others to hold people indefinitely without going to a court. That's bipartisanship.
Question number 2. The order will be Van Ray Garamendi Tubbs. This month, the Heritage Foundation published a study indicating that unnecessary federal regulations are costing consumers, businesses, and the economy approximately $46 billion each year, which the U.S. Chamber of Commerce believes is hampering job growth. Do you believe the U.S. economy is overregulated? And if so, what would you do to reduce or eliminate unnecessary federal regulations? Ms. Mann?
Probably my favorite question out of the whole bunch. I said earlier to a group of people, I was doing regulatory reform before regulatory reform was deemed cool as a national issue. I absolutely believe this country is overregulated. In the last three and a half years alone, 10,000 plus new rules. 10,000 is what makes up that $46 billion number. 106 of those were considered major impacts on businesses in the United States, and 11 regulatory policies that were considered major were repealed. So we have 106 new ones and 11 old ones were repealed. That's not true regulatory reform. That's not repealing these regulations that keep our businesses from growing and moving this country forward. That's replacing ones that 106 for 11, that number just kind of is so stark. We have to start looking at what these regulatory policies are doing to our businesses. Let's just take one out of the EPA, for example. Removing the word navigable out of the Clean Water Act. And I grant you this is getting down in the weeds a little bit. But any business that's in this district that is resource-based is going to be dramatically affected by this word removed out of the Clean Water Act. This is going to allow regional interpretation of this environmental law and interpretation by mid-level bureaucrats on your businesses that need these federal permits to go forward. There's not going to be a level playing field. The regulations will be interpreted different for California than they will for states back east. And this, again, puts an additional burden on your businesses and my business to grow. cannot operate in this environment any longer. You know, we have to start with removing major barriers. We have a micro level, a macro level issue, and a micro level issue. We have to start with removing regulatory policies and removing the funding and the mandates that go with them. Then we have to look at it from a micro perspective and start looking at the mid-level bureaucrats that are overreaching in their regulatory policy and trying to extract more from our businesses. We have to address it on both levels, and it's going to take a long time. It took us a long time to get to this point, and it's going to take us a long time to repeal some of these and get back to it. But if we aren't able to do it, businesses aren't going to continue to be able to grow. You look at some of the new restrictions coming out of the Labor Department, and again, out of EPA, and you have to find a happy medium and a balance. We have the greatest country in the world, and we can't go backwards by restricting ourselves from being able to grow.
Mr. Ray.
An example. In 1970, on the cover of Time magazine, it said that man-made emissions were causing the next ice age. In the 1990s, they said that man-made emissions were causing the world to global warming, and the world was going to burn up. Neither one happened. No 203, it leveled off again. It started 890, and no 203, we started to cool again. We are still operating for an 8032 in California to combat global warming and cap and trade, when in fact man has no control over global warming at all. Charles Lindzen of MIT has said that over 99%, and this guy is considered perhaps the foremost authority on weather and climate in the United States, maybe in the world, 99% plus of all that takes place with weather and climate has to do with the different phases of the sun. It doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing. And yet, we still have people, in the EPA running around with this cap and trade. It just, the IRS, there are 75,000 pages in the IRS, in the regulations. How on earth can it take 75,000 pages? It's just like when they did the same kind of thing when they did healthcare, and it had 27,000 pages, whatever the heck it was, and somebody said, why could it possibly take that many pages to write something? I said, only two things take that many pages to write. One, something that you don't understand, or two, something you want the people reading to understand. There is way too much regulation. And in some cases, it's regulated stuff that they don't even have control of. Yeah, we're going to need to read it right. It's going to take some time. It's not something that's just going to end overnight. But we have to go in there with that mentality to start taking those unnecessary regulations apart, and all these different regulations, and, for example, IRS regulations, EPA regulations, all the different ones that politicians have used to make areas for certain companies open and to make it more difficult than the competition. I think we have somebody in the, I forget which department it is, but this guy from GE, the CEO from GE, is one of these czars or something, which is interesting. He's like a job czar or something. He said in the last 10 years he's outsourced 1 million jobs overseas. Since 2007 he hasn't paid any taxes, but they paid $84 million to lobbyists. Does any of that make sense? The base thing is we have to go back to the mentality that we're going to straighten this thing out and get things back on track, start making some sense here. And the American people see it and understand it, and they are screaming for somebody to tell them the truth and to step up and do something not based on a party, who's going to make who look good, or I'm going to vote for this because he said it, but something to step up and start taking this stuff apart a piece at a time so it makes sense. People on either side will agree when you sit down and show them a solution that makes sense.
Congressman.
The question started with a very, very interesting word, unnecessary. We ought to define that before we go any further talking about regulations. What are the unnecessary regulations and what are the necessary regulations? Let's talk about those a little bit. Shall we talk about clean air? Is it good to have asthma among all of our children? Or is it important to regulate emissions and air quality? You like a little bit of arsenic and mercury for your kids? The EPA is regulating the air quality of the coal-fired power plants, and a lot of the rhetoric you hear comes from coal-fired power plants that say that's unnecessary. Maybe for them, but it is necessary for the children. They want to talk about Wall Street and the collapse of the financial institutions. Clearly a case of deregulation, where the government did not regulate did not hold accountable, and did not enforce the existing regulations, let alone write decent regulations to protect all of us, homeowners as well as lenders. Regulation, necessary, unnecessary? How about deep water drilling? Remember what happened in the coast, in the Gulf Coast, where there was very little regulation and very little oversight. And now new regulations are in place dealing with how drilling is going to take place in the ocean, off in the ocean. Is it necessary or unnecessary? It just turns out that had we used the regulations that Norway had, that accident probably would never have occurred. The toughest regulations in the world that the oil industry finds they can use off the coast of Norway. We have yet to write those kind of regulations to protect millions of people and hundreds of billions of dollars of resources. We talk about health care, the Patient's Bill of Rights, stopping insurance companies from discriminating against everybody in this room, whether you're old, whether you have a pre-existing condition, whether you're a woman or a man or your age. Those are regulations that protect us. So when we talk about regulations, we ought to be very careful when we use the word unnecessary. It's easily thrown around. But then when it affects your personal health, when it affects your children's well-being and the air in which they breathe or have to breathe, we ought to be really careful. And we ought to use regulations that are wise. You may want to note that in the last 4 years, 3.5 years, the Obama administration has issued fewer regulations than the previous administration, and has repealed and modified many more than were done in the previous 8 years. So regulations are constantly subject to change as circumstances change, as the economy and as the population changes. And that's not a bad thing. But be careful when you say just toss unnecessary around, because many regulations are necessary for your health as well as your children's.
Mr. Tubbs.
Very good. When President Obama took over office, he pointed back to President Bush for the economy and how terrible it was and how it was going south. I remember back not too far when President Reagan took over for a much worse economy with double-digit unemployment, double-digit inflation, double-digit interest rates. Heck, we just have bad unemployment, which is terrible, but 1 out of 3. One of the things that Ronald Reagan did was lower taxes, yes, but he lowered regulations. Regulations, the job of those. We've forgotten that. This last 3 years, we have not addressed the regulation issue like Ronald Reagan did under the Grace Commission back in the early 80s. And it was less than 3 years that horrible economy turned around. And we were producing the largest expansion since World War II in our economy. And here we are still stuck with the unemployment we have. When you talk about unnecessary regulation, clean air, sure, we want clean air, but how do we get there? We are spending billions and billions on wind and solar. We've got proven technology today between natural gas and nuclear power that regulations are standing in the way from. You know, we have 104 nuclear power plants cooking in America right now for the last 30 years plus, just fine. Old technology, where countries like France, over 70% nuclear. Holland, over 80% nuclear. Our regulations are standing in the way of clean air and nuclear power. Let's fix that. Talk about jobs and regulations. I like Newt Gingrich's idea. You know, get rid of the EPA and replace it with the Environmental Solutions Agency. What does that look like? The American Disabilities Act. I think it's a great regulation that helps our disabled Americans participate in normal society much better. I think it's a great regulation. The problem is, it's got this personal injury lawsuit capability inside of it, where you have lawyers and people going around to businesses giving or filing unnecessary, frivolous lawsuits and getting away with it because it's cheaper for smart business people who know the risk to just settle, write a check and let them go. But when I talked to a restaurant owner in Martinez who wanted to open up a second restaurant and hire 30 more people, he was hit with one of those ADA lawsuits, and he didn't open up that restaurant, and there's 30 jobs gone. Talking to a Chevron engineer who says, the EPA regulates me with how many or how much heavy metals I can have in my wastewater that goes to open water sources. Great. I love that regulation. I don't want mercury and lead in our water. But he says the EPA tells me how to take the metal out, and it's more expensive and inefficient. Just tell me the limit and let me do it. That's how government needs to work with the job creators. When you talk about unnecessary, unnecessary kills jobs without providing extra. Fix the regulations in a job-friendly way. That protects our environment.
So for question number 3, the order will be Ray Garamendi Tubbs Van. In 2009, Congress enacted the America's Affordable Health Choices Act, which mandates the purchase of private health care insurance by individuals and certain businesses. What is your position on this particular requirement, and how do you believe it will affect small businesses? Mr. Ray.
I don't think there's any question. We're already seeing, it's not even fully implemented, we're already seeing on businesses where they're unable to expand because of the additional cost, or they're just closing up and going to work for somebody else. The problem with, one of the bigger problems that I see with Obamacare basically, is that it will lead to the same type of medical care that, for example, they have in England. If you read the article recently, there was a guy that brought his wife over to America to have surgery. Because in England, where they have socialized medicine, she went, which was basically the same thing. She went to the doctor and they told her that she had a particular type of cancer that would kill her within a year if she didn't have surgery. The earliest surgical date that she could get was 18 months away. That doesn't make any sense. There's no question that the healthcare industry has gotten too expensive. There's other things that need to be done, though. The ability to buy insurance from other states. The ability to tort reform, for example. Tort reform. Some of these lawsuits are crazy. I mean, they get a class action suit, and they sue for millions of people. The attorneys get $30 or $40 million, and everybody that was in the action got $150. It doesn't make sense. So the idea is, do we need to reduce the cost for health care? Yes. Is Obamacare the way to do that? No. Is there a way to do it that makes sense? Yes, there is. It's just a matter of using some logic and getting it done. Thank you.
Congressman.
One of the great debates of the last 100 years. How does America provide health care? How do we pay for it? It's not a new debate. This has been going on for a century. About 50 years ago, actually 50 years ago, America decided that they could create a program of health insurance that would cover universally all Americans over 65. It's called Medicare, and it really does work. In the Affordable Health Care Act, there's a major portion of it that deals specifically with Medicare. It took $500 billion out of the pockets of the insurance company, an unnecessary bonus that they had been receiving for the previous 9 years, and transferred that money into benefits for seniors, specifically providing programs such as wellness, free visits to determine health status. Some 31 million seniors now have access to that. And because of the Patients' Bill of Rights in that legislation, discrimination in health insurance no longer exists in America. It's illegal for an insurance company to discriminate against an American based upon their age, their health status, pre-existing condition, their sex. Those things are passed now in America. This is all part of the Affordable Health Care Act. And indeed, a portion of it, which was demanded by the insurance company, is the mandate to buy insurance or to pay a penalty. That's now being debated by the U.S. Supreme Court, and we'll see which way it goes. But the rest of the pieces of legislation are extremely important. For hospitals in this area, this legislation would significantly reduce those portion of the uncompensated care. These are people that show up in the hospital emergency room and have no money for which to pay. That cost is then transferred to everybody else, either taxpayers or onto your private insurance policy. That's partly dealt with, or largely dealt with in this piece of legislation. It's much needed, and it's much maligned. The cost curve is changed as a result of this legislation. True costs are going up in medical care across the board, and Medicare, along with everyone else, is on the same rising tide. We need to deal with that. In the legislation is a major piece of cost containment called electronic medical records. All of us, if you're surprise you to know what this is all about. There's money out there for clinics so that people don't have to go to the emergency rooms. Clinics are growing. Clinics are in place in this county and providing services to those who are underinsured or not insured at all. In 2014, there'll be an exchange which will provide an opportunity for all of us to shop for the very best insurance policy that fits our particular needs. So what's wrong with all of that? Nothing can be said that is perfect about any piece of legislation. But this takes a major step. Some 40 million Americans will now have insurance as a result of this legislation, and the cost curve is being bent.
Mr. Tubbs.
You said that question one more time.
In 2009, Congress enacted the America's Affordable Health Choices Act, which mandates the purchase of private health care insurance by individuals and certain businesses. What is your position on this particular requirement, and how do you believe it will affect small businesses?
Yeah, the question about the mandate. Okay. It would be great if we could all have health care on somebody else's dime. It would be great if we could afford everything and not have to say no. But it gets back to what I said in my opening statement about priorities and requirements and how much money you have and stretching dollars for every inch they'll go. And then drawing a line and saying it's not good for the long-term future to spend this way. And it gets back to what I mentioned about the Constitution. You know, we'll see what the Supreme Court says in June. But the question Judge Stevens said about, is it constitutional to create commerce, to then go ahead and regulate it? The Constitution, that common founding document, is that's the main question of this. Now you take a look at its effects on small business. And the last I looked, last summer, there was over 1,500 different entities, unions, some of them, small businesses, McDonald's, already getting exemptions from the Obamacare bill because they know it's not going to work. They can't afford it. Another issue with this bill, when you talk about how it affects small businesses and jobs, in 1967 it was estimated that Medicare, and it's a good program, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I want to save Medicare, I want to afford Medicare, I want it to be there for seniors. I don't want them to lose their services. I'm just pointing out a fact. In 1967, Medicare was predicted to cost $12 billion in 1990. It cost $110 billion. Originally, Obamacare was supposed to cost $940 billion. Well, it's just 1 year later, folks. 1 year later, and the latest Congressional Budget Office estimate is $1.76 trillion. What's it going to be 30 years from now? We can't afford the way it's done right now. We have the best medical system in the world. It's about access, it's about quality. You can tell story after story of people who come to America to get their medical care. There are things in Obamacare that are good, pre-existing conditions. My 18-year-old daughter is on my health care up until 26. I think it's a great idea. Not dropping somebody when they're sick. Excellent idea, but those cost money. And we have to do things that are smart. Government takeover of the healthcare system is not the way to go forward. Talking about unions again. The mandate, and if a company decides to drop your health care, then they just pay a small fine. It's cheaper. Well, there's a reason there's unions, because I know my company that I work for would drop me in a heartbeat just to save that extra dollar and put me on the government healthcare system. I don't want that. And I don't want to see that going forward. There's smart reform we can do for our healthcare system. We need to do it right. Thank you.
Ms. Van.
A mandate to purchase something isn't the solution to our healthcare woes in this country. We have access to some of the greatest medical providers in the world. Enforcing this mandate is going to change the way we utilize this wonderful healthcare system that we have. As it stands currently, 4 million people in this country will be penalized for not having health care or the type of health care that the government now tells them that they have to have. I don't know about you, but my America isn't the America that tells me I have to buy something. And what does this do to small businesses? Small businesses will reduce numbers of employees. They will reduce the hours that the employees work to fall into a loophole. And make no mistake about it, the cost of this will be borne by you and I. It won't be absorbed. You and I, and the people providing the services, the healthcare providers, will have to pick up the cost of this. Now, once this mandate is removed, Obamacare has the potential for bankrupting the system. We cannot allow for that to happen. We have to repeal this mandate and Obamacare and start looking at other solutions. Obamacare raided Medicare. It took $500 billion out of the current Medicare system without addressing how we backfill that today. We have a gap that's going to hit us on the Medicare side that's going to be insurmountable at some point. We have to make sure that Medicare is there for our seniors that are currently using it and our seniors who are going to be using it shortly. We cannot let Obamacare continue to pull down like they did from the Medicare as it stands now. And back to the exemptions. If Obamacare was such a wonderful piece of legislation, why did Congress exempt themselves? We really need to think about that. Why did specific businesses ask to be exempted? This isn't going to work. We need to go back to the drawing board and figure out a healthcare system that holds me accountable for my own health, that holds me accountable for how I take care of myself, but still protects our citizens that need that protection. There is a way to get there, but what we have today isn't that path.
Okay, question number 4, the order will be Garamendi, Tubbs, Van, Ray. By 2030, the number of Medicare enrollees is expected to increase from 47 million to approximately 80 million people. And by 2037, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be completely exhausted. What kinds of reforms do you believe are necessary to ensure that the United States is able to fulfill these unfunded mandates without defaulting on its debt? Congressman?
The question is actually incorrect. The Medicare system is not going to go bankrupt. The Medicare system, like most other parts of the American economy, is going to face a major change as the new baby boomers retire and become Medicare recipients. However, if you look at this, there are going to be many, many ways in which Medicare will continue. There will be changes in Medicare, not on the benefit side, but rather on the way in which it operates. For example, using prepaid health plans is one way to control costs, allowing the American government to negotiate drug prices can save tens of billions of dollars a year. Right now, that's not allowed because of the power of the pharmaceutical industry. There are many other ways in which Medicare will be changed over time. But I will tell you this, the Republican budget that passed Congress just 2 weeks ago will destroy Medicare. There's absolutely no doubt Medicare will not survive given that budget. The proposal in it would require that all people that are less than 55 years of age will not receive Medicare. They'll get a voucher and be forced to go out to the private health insurance companies and do the very best they can. If the rest of the policies, that is the repeal of the Affordable Health Care Act takes place, then you are repealing the Patient's Bill of Rights and the proscription on insurance companies for discriminating. So what are we going to do here? We're not going to end Medicare. If there's anything I'm going to fight for, it is the continuation of Medicare as we know it today. A program that will change over time. Benefits will be there for us, all of us, whatever age we have. But if you go with the Republican budget, as proposed, Medicare cannot survive because of the way in which people will opt out of the system. And the cost to the individual will double over the next 10 years. The overall inflation in healthcare will not be dealt with at all by that system. And it will actually increase, or quite possibly increase, the cost of healthcare. Buying insurance across the state lines is a non-starter. I was the insurance commissioner, and I could not even begin to count the number of scams and schemes that out-of-state insurance companies tried to bring to the citizens of the state of California. Health insurance policies that looked good that provided nothing, except the opportunity to pay premiums. Be careful what you're asking for. Now, the system can work. The Affordable Health Care Act is in place. It will need to be changed over time. Social Security is not going bankrupt. Changes in Social Security have happened about once every 20 years since it was incepted in the 1930s. Changes will occur in the future. One thing that could change is simply changing the way in which that system is paid for.
Mr. Tubbs, and I'm reminded that speak into a microphone, please.
Okay, this is part of that broader picture, because entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare are part of the overall budget. The key is to be able to afford it going forward, all of them. You know, you talk about those two, you got to throw in national defense in those big budget items. How are we going to afford our national defense? Because it all intertwines and matters. When we go forward, we have to look at the entire budget together and figure out how to make it work so it's balanced. Now, the status quo is not going to work. The status quo is unsustainable. Whether you want to call it bankrupt or loss of services, whatever you want to say, changes need to be made in Medicare and Social Security, as well as other areas in our budget, every other area in our budget. The idea is how do you make those changes to make sure those services that Americans have come to rely on are still there, and we can afford them into the future. So when you look at some of the sacrifices that must be made, and I did say the word sacrifice, it's got to be everywhere. And Social Security and Medicare are part of national defense and discretionary spending and all the other things that we talk about. So let's put it in that context first. When I look at a balanced budget, I see all Americans relying on the federal government less than they do today. We talk about the World War II generation as being the last great generation that sacrificed to win that war to make sure that the American dream was alive and well for us. We've been living off of their efforts, my generation for sure, my mom and dad, my kids still. But it's our turn, folks. It's our turn now to be that next great generation. And it's got to be that national movement of what are you going to give up to make sure that dream is there for them. That's the context I want to look at Social Security and Medicare and every other part of the budget going forward. Now, looking at that, yeah, there's got to be some changes. Let's start in Medicare with the $100 billion. And I use that round number. I've researched that a lot. There's 60, 80, 100, $200 billion in Medicare that's just lost to fraud and waste and abuse. That's about 20 to 25% of the budget right there. You want to save Medicare? Let's go out, put some money in that fraud department for Medicare that gets about 1 billion claims every year. And let's go save that money that's being wasted. Remember how I started about it's your money? Congress needs to spend your money wisely. Well, there's a lot of your money just being wasted because we're not going after the fraud in Medicare. Let's start there. Instead of revamping the whole thing, let's try saving that money first. Social Security, you bet. I'm 44 years old. I'm not old, whether my kids agree or not. But I know I'm in a lot better shape than my folks were, and a whole lot better shape than my grandparents were. I don't think I need to retire at 65. I don't think I need to start drawing on the government and drawing off of my children's wages at 65. That's another solution I'd throw out there is raising the age for Social Security. Just a few. Thank you.
Ms. Mann.
Entitlement programs have to be addressed. Medicare cannot be taken away from the seniors. We need to keep the promises that we made to the people who are using it and to our most vulnerable population. But we can start looking at a tiered approach to address it. It doesn't have to be addressed in one fell swoop, but it can be looked at in tiers, kind of like some of the PERS issues are being addressed. It can be a multi-tier level approach to getting it back to a stable setting. It's pure numbers. We have less people in the workforce by generations than we do in the retirement system. We population growth occur in blocks of 10 years, we have more people in the workforce. You can look at the number of people that we have aging out. You can look at how much longer we're living. You can look at the cost of healthcare in this country. And again, there's going to be additional cost to that healthcare. And the numbers of people in the workforce that is paying for this system, it's not going to work. We can't keep putting this off. We can't put, the longer we put this off and the longer we don't address this, the worse the situation's going to be. But we don't have to address it in a manner that just wipes Medicare out. The only piece of legislation that has been passed in this country that has taken money out of Medicare has been Obamacare. The Republican budget does not take $500 billion out of it. And there's absolutely a way to address saving the entitlements programs for our future generations and for the people who are using it. But there has to be some accountability. There has to be some competition in the private sector to bring prices down. And we have to start addressing it now. We can't keep putting it off for years to come because it's only going to get worse.
Mr. Ray, and please speak into a microphone.
The studies and the information that I've read, I think, from the Government Accounting Office, is that Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid will go bankrupt somewhere between 2021 and 2025. There's no question that something has to be done. On the one side, you have politicians, and I haven't read the Republican bill, so I don't know if I haven't had time for that with all the stuff that we're doing. But I know that you have to try to do something. On the one hand, you have people that are trying to do something to make sure that the seniors of today have coverage, and that the seniors of tomorrow and after will have coverage. And on the other hand, you've got people saying, well, that won't work, and they're doing nothing. There is no other offer. There's no other side that comes in from it. That doesn't make any sense. They're driving the Titanic. They can see the iceberg. They know it's coming, but they're not saying anything because they're afraid that the passengers will make the captain and crew, they'll unelect them. If you know for a fact, and we do, that we're going to go, that these systems are going to go bankrupt, we have to make some adjustments. We have to make adjustments to entitlements as a whole, or else we're going to end up just like the countries in Europe where they've got Greece and Spain and Italy. And within the next 5 years now, France is going to be going. Because their entitlements have gotten so high that the size of government is so much larger than the number of taxpayers that they either tax them to death, and at some point, the whole system collapses and crushes them. It doesn't matter if we need to make some changes in these programs. We absolutely have to. The key is sitting down with people from both sides, like John said, and I think everybody was mentioned. We have to sit down with people from both sides and say, look, we have a problem. We're sailing toward the iceberg. What do you say we change direction here for a while? See if we can't come up with some better ideas. And you can't tell me, with the quality of intelligence of the people back there, and the level of intelligence and logic of the American people, that you can't put together a program that people can live with.
Okay, this will be our last question, and the order will be Tubbs, Van, Ray, Garamendi. Do you support the tax cut provisions contained within the American Jobs Act recently approved by the House? And is there anything you would have done differently? Mr. Tubbs.
Taxes. Did I mention taxes tonight? We're not going to tax our ways to our balanced budget. You got to look at taxes in the context of what are the penalties. I mean, we have to have some taxes. I went over that, right? We have to pay for good government. But what kind of level of taxes? My solutions come from common sense. Do they work? Conservative. I believe in smaller government versus bigger government. I believe the solutions lie more in the American citizen, the American entrepreneur, the American worker, than they do in the federal government. And I believe in the Constitution. Now, there was no tax rates in the Constitution. No tax rates there. So that one's up for debate. I'm happy with the current income taxes. I mean, I have a great graph in here that shows that the top 1% of wage earners earn about 19% of the income and pay 36% of the taxes. That's all right. But you get down to the bottom 50% of Americans, and they earn about 16% of the income, and they only pay 3%. And then there's grass in between. I hear the other side always talking about, we got to raise taxes on the rich. We got to raise taxes on the rich. Pay their fair share. When I look at that graph and I see that fair share, it looks pretty fair to me. And oh, by the way, us Americans are trying to get up there. They're paying a lot of money up there. And oh, by the way, the ones paying those high taxes are the ones growing their businesses and creating jobs. And when you look at higher taxes as a way to solve our budget problems, it's really showing that we're failing in government and looking to the American producer to bail us out. Getting back again to this theme that I have tonight. We need to be responsible in government. The tax rates are where they're at. I like where they're at. I don't want to raise them on income. I want to see corporate income tax 35%, now the highest in the world because Japan finally figured it out and lowered theirs. I want to see that come down. I want to see us run responsible government. I'm into numbers. I'm into real solutions. I think we should be able to run our government on about 17% of the gross national product. That should be our target. And I'm going to add 3% in there to pay off federal debt so that our kids don't have to. If we're taxing our economy, and more than that, taxes are too high. Less than that, I think that's about the right issue, or the right place. So no, I don't want to see the Bush tax cuts expire in 2013. I don't want to see increasing taxes on the rich because I think it's going to cost jobs for those of us who want to work for a living. So, in a nutshell, taxes are not the solution to our budget problems. Good government, responsible government is. Thank you.
Ms. Van,
Can you restate the question one more time?
do you support the tax cut provisions contained within the American Jobs Act recently approved by the House? And is there anything you would have done differently?
The Jobs Act is a great first step. It was introduced in the House, I think, approximately about March 8th. It's a great first step in removing some regulatory barriers for small business, allowing businesses to have new avenues to go out and advertise for investors. It strengthens local and community banks. It's definitely the first good bipartisan step in the right direction. And it mostly focuses on small businesses. Now we need to continue with those steps. That's a big step. We need to keep going. This needs to apply to medium businesses and to large businesses. We need to make it go further. Like I said, it was a great step in the right direction. It was a bipartisan step in the right direction, but it only scratches the surface. It removes a few regulatory barriers so that capital can be injected back into the system so that small businesses can grow. But we need to take it even further. Once we get some of our out of control and unnecessary regulatory policies out of our businesses' way, and we set a good, clear playing field as far as our tax regulations go, our businesses know where they can start from. They know how they can grow, and they know what they need to do to get things done. We have to get ourselves and other levels of government out of the way so that our businesses can do that. So it was a good first step, but it needs to go further.
Mr. Ray.
I apologize, I haven't read the bill, so I don't know exactly what the tax cuts were. I know the tax cuts in themselves are a good idea. For example, if I say to you, I'm going to tax you 20% more this year, will that help you become more successful? No. You can't tax your way to success. You have to reduce the amount of taxes now. The way to reduce taxes is to reduce the size of the government so you have less the amount of tax dollars. In 1977, Jimmy Carter started the Energy Department so that we could get off. His goal was to get us less dependent on foreign oil. At that time, we had 30-34% of our oil from foreign sources. 35 years later, we have about 18,000 in the Department of Energy, 18,000 federal employees, 100,000 contracted employees. They spend billions and billions of dollars a year, and we get approximately 70% of our oil from foreign sources. There are places that we can definitely cut without the threats that they make every time of, well, old people are going to cut their money, the military are going to cut their money. Two places they never cut. One is government jobs, which the government's too big, we need to cut those back. And the second is they never cut their salary. When it comes time to take in that debt ceiling, we make that big run at the end to save everybody, which was exciting because they only do 6 months ahead of time, and it was coming. You don't tax your way to success. You reduce the amount of outflow that you have, reduce the size of government, reduce the taxes, turn the American people loose. You don't need any stimulus money. You can create over 3 million jobs in the first 24 months by opening up the energy industry with as John said, with some good coverage and good to make sure the emissions are all shot. It can be done right. You can't tell me. Other countries, we haven't gotten a permit to build a nuclear power plant in the last 5 years. China has 14, they're building 25 more, and they've got permits for a bunch of them. Obviously not permits, but they're in the planning stages for a bunch of them. They're smarter than we are. They can do a better job. Obama says, well, we have to drill for oil. That's terrible. Drill, 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 that's all they say. Well, and he says gas is the fuel of the past. Really, what do you put in his limousine today? What's he going to put in his limousine tomorrow when he wants to go? Renewables are the way of the future, but they're not ready for prime time. And these foreign countries that we're buying oil from, that don't even like us, that we're giving hundreds of billions of dollars to, where did they get the oil? I think they drilled a hole. You tell me that their contractors, their architects, and their engineers are smarter than ours? I don't think so. Most of them went to college here. So the idea that we can't cut taxes is nonsense. The idea that you can't cut government is crazy. They are hiring for Obamacare right now, what is it, 17,000 more IRS agents? Your world's about to get more exciting. Yeah. You can cut the government, you can cut the expenditures necessary to go out, you can cut taxes. It just takes some logical sense.
Congressman Garamendi.
I think the question had to do with the tax cuts in the Republican budget that passed 2 weeks ago. A very, very good question. That budget would create a $4 trillion increase in the national debt. It would have an immediate increase in the deficit, and it would be 40 years before there would be a balanced budget. Principal reasons are twofold. One, it is an austerity budget on steroids. 4 million Americans would immediately lose their job in the next 18 months. It would also create one of the most skewed tax codes in the world. For those men and women whose adjusted gross income is over $1 million a year, they would receive a $394,000 tax cut on that $1 million income. They are not the job creators. The job creators are, in fact, small businesses that would be protected under the proposals that the Democrats have put forward. The Democrats reduced the taxes on businesses 3 times and proposed additional tax cuts on small businesses going forward. Every wage earner in America has received a 4%, 2.5% reduction this year and a 3.5% reduction in the previous year in their taxes. That was the payroll tax deduction. Let's understand that during the Clinton period, the taxes at that time created a budget surplus in the last 2 years of the 1990s. And had those policies been carried forward, and the Bush tax cuts in 2001 and 2003 had not gone forward, the chances are good that we would still have a balanced budget, even with the decline in the economy. But no, instead, major tax cuts took place. Great at the high end, less at the low end, creating, over the last 20 years, the tax policy and other policies have created the greatest disparity between the working men and women of America, that is the middle class, and the top 2%. It is as wide as it has ever been in this nation. The middle class has stalled out, largely because of governmental policies on taxes and on benefits. The Republican budget is an economic disaster. It is the upside down. It is a budget that rewards the rich and takes money from the working men and women of America and destroys jobs. And back to Medicare. It does destroy Medicare, and about 50% of Medicaid, which is cut by over $810 million, goes for nursing home care. So think about your parents and what that might be.
The final item tonight will be closing remarks, and our order will be Van, Ray, Garamendi, Tubbs. Thank you. Ms. Van, your closing remarks.
The middle class in our country is stalled out because we don't have jobs. The middle class in our country is stalled out because they are the small business owners that are being taxed and overregulated to the point that they cannot grow their businesses. We aren't going to make up $16+ trillion from the tax cuts that have been enacted over the last, I'll just say 10 years. We're still not going to cover our national deficit with that. We are stalled out because we are no longer number one in manufacturing. We're number two, and that happened in the last 2 years. We're stalled out because of the government policies that limit us from being able to use our resources and generate jobs. We have very heavy resource job producers, not only in this congressional district, but in this wonderful state. Oil, gas, mining, agriculture, forest. We need to be able to use our resources. We've learned how to use those resources wisely, and those industries create jobs in this district. The middle class is stalled out because of our overzealous and overreaching regulators that refuse to let us grow private sector jobs because it's more beneficial to them when you grow government jobs. We are stalled out because we have leaders who don't have experience in the private sector, who haven't had to sign not only the back of the check, but a front of the check. That's why we're stalled out in this country. And we are at a moment in time that's going to dictate the future of this country. That's going to put us back to being number one in manufacturing, not number two. We are at a point where we have to choose representatives who will put this district first, who care about the 3rd Congressional District, who care about the people in this district, who have a record to prove that they have done things from business development to getting government out of the way for you. Not looking for another seat to run, but truly and honestly here to represent you. And that is the only way we can get this country moving forward. And that's how we get the middle class from stalling out. We don't pull people down. We need to lift people up. You don't break people who are injecting capital in the system to make me as a middle class person do better. You do better because we all come up together. As the tides rise, so do the ships. So we are at a point where you need to choose a representative who can lead not only this 3rd Congressional District to a better future, but this country to a better future. And I hope that you choose me to do that. Thank you for your support this evening.
Mr. Ray, you have 3 minutes.
I am an optimist by nature, where I think most politicians in Washington are pessimists. They see what they have, their glasses always half empty, and they're trying to figure out how to get more and more of that glass. I'm not just an optimist, I'm an American optimist. But I don't just look at my glass being half full. I'm trying to figure out ways to fill it up and make it overflow so I can get everybody else to drink. John F. Kennedy said a rising tide floats all boats. We get America to work, and we can do that right now. There are ways that we could put America to work that wouldn't cost the taxpayer any money, and to do it cleanly and correctly. There's no reason that we can't do it. American architects, engineers, and contractors are as good as any in the world. They can do the job. The biggest issue right now in America is just getting government out of the way for them. Government should be like a good referee in an athletic event. They don't determine the outcome of who's going to win or lose. They should make sure that everybody knows the rules and everybody plays fair, and then allow the teams to play. Because Americans are incredibly industrious and creative. If you get out of their way, you give them half a chance. The housing industry is trying to bounce back right now. Even though Congress has made one bad ruling and one bad piece of legislation right after the next, they have stalled out our recovery much more than it should have been. Because they don't understand what they're doing. Because they won't admit that the original problem was created by a handful of politicians Went to Freddie Mac and said, hey, make more loans to more people that can't afford it. Or what was it, 1995, that Community Reinvestment, some kind of act in 1995, I apologize, I don't know the exact name. And then Wall Street, by bundling good loans with bad loans so you couldn't tell that they were bad in there, gave it legs, let it take off. They created the entire situation, but they won't admit that. We have right now the opportunity to make a decision on where we want to go with the rest of our future. America in the last 300 years has done more, created more, invented more, accomplished more than all of the other civilizations in the history of the world combined. And we have a choice right now. We can either decide that we want to go a socialist European style government, which we can stand there and watch Europe, watch them just go bankrupt, which is where we'll go on the same, if you're driving on the same road, you end up at the same place. And end up just bankrupt in mediocrity, and end up in the history books as a once great civilization, like Rome and Greece and some of the others. Or we have the opportunity to put ourselves back on track by opening up the energy industry, getting housing back on track, getting small businesses working again, getting America going in a positive direction, getting industry back into our country again. So America once again becomes the land of opportunity, the place to be. And can you imagine, with what we've created and developed up to this point, can you imagine what we could possibly do in the next 300 years? That's the America that I want my kids to grow up in, my grandkids to grow up in. At the same time as these jobs, we get jobs, and we also get more, we get less entitlements, more people working off welfare and unemployment checks, on payroll checks, then we go out to the deficit. I would love to represent you. Thank you.
Congressman McGarry. 3 minutes.
I want to congratulate and thank my colleagues here at the table for sharing this evening with all of us. It's very important what's going on here. America is going to be making some choices about which direction we're going to be going in this election. And rarely is it so clear, the paths, the differences in the paths that are being proposed. In the recent Republican budget, the path is clearly laid out. We spoke to that at some length. The other path is one that is based upon the long traditions of America, upon the traditions of this country where the government works with the private sector. It goes right back to George Washington. One of the very first things he did was to hand Alexander Hamilton a letter saying, I want an industrial policy and I want it to include these 7 things. And indeed, the day he was inaugurated, he refused to wear a suit from Europe, but rather he used American cloth and American tailors. We could rebuild the American economy. We can do it with wise public policies. We've discussed many here today. And you've seen some differences in approach. I love this work. It's been my life's work. And I'll not give up one moment of this work that I've been privileged to have. The troubles that this nation have are all within our grasp, and solutions are available. We need to apply ourselves, and we need to find the compromises to make it happen. I don't have much hope in the next 6 months of finding that. But when the election is over, we need to put our shoulder to the wheel and make sure that we find the solutions. I hope I've given you some sense of where I think we ought to be taking this country. I do know that we can rebuild the American manufacturing industry, can rebuild it with the kind of law that I proposed, talked about it today in a press conference in San Francisco. And that is that our tax money, your tax money, my tax money, be used to buy American-made equipment. And that we not use that money to buy overseas products, whether they are wind turbines or buses or trains or whatever. We can do these things. We do need wise tax policy. We also need to be sensitive to the needs of our elders. The seniors in this country are going to be a large part of our population, and proposals that have been put forward really destroy their opportunity, whether it's the Medicaid, the necessity of many seniors to depend upon Medicaid for their nursing home, or the Medicare program, which is proposed by the Republicans to simply be destroyed, privatized, and put you back in the hands of the insurance industry that I know so very, very well, and all the discrimination that comes with it. We have a great task to make sure that our national security is strong, that we don't waste our money on military adventures. We end the war in Afghanistan, bring our troops home as President Obama has successfully done in Iraq, and get on with building this nation's economy. And we can do these things. We're going to have to do it together. We're going to have to do it with compromise, and we're going to have to do it with some very clear policies. We look forward to this coming election as all of us debate these issues, and I thank you all very much for joining us tonight.
Mr. Tubb, you have 3 minutes.
Would like to add my thank you to everybody coming out tonight. This is a great chance to take a look at the people asking you for their support and who you're going to pick to be your voice in Washington, D.C. for this area. I don't like notes, but I'm going to read something because it's so important. February 16th of this year, Secretary Timothy Geithner, Treasury Secretary, to the House Budget Committee, said these words of President Obama's 2013 budget, the most expensive in United States history. That budget, quote, would put the U.S. on an unsustainable course if enacted. Secretary Geithner went on to say, although the Obama administration doesn't have a definitive solution to the debt crisis, it definitely knows it doesn't like the Republican alternative. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason why someone like me has a chance of representing you at this time in our history is because we have a failure of leadership in Washington, D.C. by politicians who don't stick their neck out, offer solutions, defend them to the American people, and build the bridges to get them enacted. Now, I'm going to say something very important right now. I respect Congressman Garamendi and honor the lifelong service he has given to the state and to this country. I would never take that away from him. But quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for new blood, new ideas. The $1 trillion deficit shows the failure of those that are there. Now, someone up here said it's no time for rookies. It wasn't one of these two. I say it's no time for status quo politicians who keep trying the same things over and over again and keep failing. I'm offering real solutions, real ideas. I've got leadership through war, through peace, through small businesses, through family. I'm a commander of my unit. I've built those bridges. I've solved problems. I'm no rookie at fixing things, at making hard decisions, defending them to my people, and moving forward, and listening when there's better ideas out there. The time now, folks, is to elect representatives who don't care about partisanship, don't care about the next election, don't care about all the things that they care about today. It's time to elect people who care about making things right, about solving the problems to save this American dream for the future generations. That's why I'm running. That's why I'm asking for your support. That's why I hope you vote for me this June and this November. Thank you very much. God bless you, and God bless America.